My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are doing a thematic study of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, as already noted, and we've been examining the concept of the end. Paul said the resurrection would be at the end. And he said, for he, that is Christ, must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. When he has put all enemies under his feet, then shall he also himself likewise be subject to the one who put all things under his feet. Now, here's something I want you to notice. Paul says that Christ would reign until he delivered up the kingdom to the Father. It is common in the literature, at least in amillennial circles, certainly in the circles in which I was raised, to read commentators who say, for instance, Wayne Jackson, an outspoken opponent of preterism, says we have to remember that when Christ comes, he is no longer reigning. It is common, and we'll have more to say about this later, for commentators to realize the Bible says Christ will reign forever and forever. His reign is without end. And so they say, well, Christ will reign forever, but he will surrender the mediatorial aspect of his reign. More on that later. The question is, what did Paul mean when he said, then comes the end, when he shall deliver up the kingdom to the Father? Is he talking about Christ abdicating the throne? Is he talking about from that point forward, i.e. the end, Christ would no longer reign? Well, let me present this to you as a preliminary thought. In every single other passage, both Old Testament and New, that talks about Christ's relationship to the kingdom at his parousia, at the resurrection, at the judgment, speaks of him entering fully into and exercising his reign forever and forever. That kind of flies in the face of the claim that Paul was saying Jesus is going to hand over the kingdom and no longer have the sovereignty over the kingdom. Now, of many, many, many Old Testament passages that I could examine, I want to focus on Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel was given a night vision, and he saw the four beasts come up, and through that fourth beast, the little horn came up. Now, that little horn persecuted the saints, wore them out. But now watch this. I'm going to read this so that I don't miss anything for you. I watched until thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Now watch this. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Folks, this is Revelation chapter 20. Now watch. I watched then, because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking, I watched until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beast, they had their domination taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season at a time. That verse is so pregnant with meaning, but I can't talk about it. I was watching in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, coming on the clouds of heaven, and they brought him near before him. Watch this. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom. Then all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Do you catch the power of that? Now, I was raised believing that Daniel 7, 13 and 14 talked about the ascension of Christ to sit at the right hand of the Father. That is absolutely false. The coming of the Son of Man here is at the time when the thrones were seated. It is at the time of the judgment of the little horn. It is as a result of the judgment of the little horn that the kingdom was then given to the one like the Son of Man. This is not Pentecost. This is not the ascension. This is the coming of Christ in judgment to receive, not to surrender, but to receive the kingdom. Now, did the kingdom not exist? Now remember, I'm not denying at all that Christ ascended to sit on the right hand of the Father and there to begin ruling and reigning. But that was a transitional, temporary, consolidating reign until he had put all enemies under his feet. When he put all enemies under his feet, he would enter fully into his reign, exactly like Daniel 7 teaches. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 is the coming of the Son of Man at the time of the everlasting kingdom. Unless one is willing, unless one is able to say that the coming of Christ in Daniel 7 in judgment of the little horn for persecuting the saints, unless that's a different coming of the Lord from 1 Corinthians 15, then guess what? We have to honor the fact that Daniel 7 is the coming of the Son of Man in judgment of the persecutor. And when the judgment of the persecutor took place, the Son of Man entered into fully the exercise of the kingdom. Why? Because he had put all enemies under his feet. And that's 1 Corinthians 15. We will have more to say about Daniel 7 and the time of its fulfillment. But the point today is, if it is the case that the coming of the Son of Man in Daniel 7 is the coming of the Lord at the time of the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and if it is the case that the coming of the Son of Man in Daniel chapter 7 would be in judgment of the persecutor, and it was, at which time he received the kingdom, then it must be the case that the coming of the Son of Man in 1 Corinthians 15 is not the termination of the reign of Christ. It is Christ entering fully into his reign with the Father. This, folks, is devastating to the idea that at his coming, Jesus somehow surrenders the sovereignty of the kingdom. No, when he had put all enemies under his feet, he would enter fully into, with the Father, his everlasting, his unending reign. And we've got more. So we'll see you on the flip side.